Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Colonel Pat Sieber, Communications Director for Army Futures Command, and welcome to the Pentagon Press Briefing Room, where we're glad to have the Honorable Bruce Jette, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, and General John Mike Murray, Commanding General, U.S. Army Futures Command. They're going to provide some brief opening remarks on Army modernization, and I'll also offer an update on Army Futures Command. Then they'll take some questions, which I will moderate. Just as a reminder, this is an on-the-record, on-camera press briefing, and so all badges need to be removed. Thanks again for being here. Without further ado, I'll open the floor to Dr. Jette.
So, first, welcome. Thank you for coming today, and I hope that we have an opportunity to provide you some insights and understanding that maybe you didn't have before you came in today. For nearly 2 decades, the Army has deferred modernization in order to support continuous combat operations. During this time, the global security environment has grown more competitive and more volatile. Army leadership recognized the need for fundamental change with one primary objective to guide us: make soldiers and units more capable and lethal to deter conflict or, if necessary, win decisively. Last year, the Army made its most significant organizational restructuring in over 40 years by establishing the Army Futures Command, or AFC. As a result, one commander, who sits to my left, is responsible for transforming the National Defense Strategy into an operational vision for multi-domain operations, identify the technology requirements near, mid, and far, and manage the technology enterprise, and work closely with the acquisition and sustainment communities. ASALT, my organization, continues to lead its role of oversight, management, policy, and particularly with respect to acquisition functions, control of the broader material development and sustainment process. G8 performs primary resource management functions, and together these 3 organizations form the Future Force Modernization Enterprise, or FFME. ASALT, AFC, and the G8 are working together in a new way, leveraging authorities derived from Congress and unity of effort to improve the way we do business, to better allocate resources, and to make the Army more lethal, capable, and efficient. Each of the organizations is focused on a particular portion of modernization, enabling them to focus resources and expertise together through synchronization. Through cross-functional teams, AFC remains laser-focused on the Army's 6 modernization priorities. My office retains management and control over all aspects of the material development and procurement process. The establishment of AFC affords an opportunity to create a more collaborative working environment between the CFTs and the program executive offices. Each CFT has a primary PEO. The signature systems of the CFTs each have a program manager. Of greatest value is the collaboration. CFTs participate in the development of the acquisition strategies. Equally, the acquisition community contributes to the operational requirements development process. Yet, each retain their fundamental responsibilities. We are focused on continuously modernizing the Army through the development and timely delivery of overmatch capability to the soldier in order to fight and win our nation's wars. All of this is possible because of the strong working relationship between Congress and our senior leadership. Thank you, and I hope to answer your questions this morning.
So, thanks, Dr. Jette. And just to add my welcome this morning, it's kind of an unusual hour for the Pentagon press conference and the Pentagon press conference room, so I appreciate you being here this morning. And most importantly, apologize for the 10-minute delay, which was solely my fault. So I apologize for keeping you waiting for a few minutes. I'd like to start off and really kind of echo everything Dr. Jette talked about, but also add some specific thanks to Congress for the stable, adequate funding that the Army and really DOD has gotten over the last few years, which has really enabled the modernization effort that we're undertaking right now. It was a fortuitous confluence of events, if you will, that the leadership of the Army having the courage to really undertake this significant reorganization and modernization effort, and that stable, adequate funding that Congress provided us that enabled the entire effort. We spent yesterday, Dr. Jette and I did on the Hill, as well as the CFTs, the cross-functional team leaders and program managers. 40-plus engagements on the Hill, concluding with a session last night where many of you saw the same thing we showed Congress last night. And we had what I think was a great day on the Hill yesterday. So thanks for your time and really the rehearsal that you gave us on Tuesday night for last night's event in the Visitor Center. And I'd also like to echo Dr. Jette's comments about the close working relationship between ASALT and AFC. I think that's absolutely key and fundamental to everything that we've been able to accomplish and we will accomplish in the future. I think most evident piece of that is, as Dr. Jette mentioned, the relationships and really the focus of the CFT directors, cross-functional team directors, and their counterpart, PM, and in many cases PEO. And also, beyond the G8, really the entire HQDA staff, to include the Secretariat, not only the G8, but the G3, others, and really fellow ACOM commanders are really behind this. And Bruce mentioned the FFME, Future Force Modernization Enterprise. When I look at that, and as I've thought about it, we're really talking about the entire Army is the Future Force Modernization Enterprise. And I mentioned this a couple nights ago, but a few minutes to give you an update on where Army Futures Command is. This past Saturday, July 13th, marked the 1 year since we first established a presence, and Austin was announced as the final location for Army Futures Command. At that time, there were 12 people on the ground, establishing, as Secretary McCarthy labeled it, a beachhead. So starting from scratch, and when I say starting from scratch, a completely blank canvas, that organization has grown from that beachhead to more than 24,000 soldiers and civilians located in 25 states and 15 countries. And for many ways over the past year, growing from that original 12, I like to describe it as a startup trying to manage a merger. As we've assumed command of subordinate organizations from other organizations across the Army. As many of you probably are tracking, the first to transfer was ARCIC from TRADOC, now known as the Futures and Concept Center. And I think the key thing that the Futures and Concept Center, the contribution to the Future Force Modernization Enterprise, is this concept that we call multi-domain operations. And it's key because the concept has to provide the underpinning or the foundation for everything else we're doing. The organizational structure changes, the material solutions that the CFTs are driving, they all have to be underpinned by an operational concept. So that continues to mature. We will turn that into doctrine at some point in the future, probably not in the next year or two, but as we flesh out this concept, look at it across what we call .mil-PF, so doctrine, organization, the leader development that has to go into it, that will become a future doctrine to replace air-land battle. And special thanks to General Townsend, who's now moved on, and now General Funk for the cooperation from TRADOC, and really the seamless transition of what was ARCIC into Futures and Concept Center. We next transitioned RDECOM from Army Material Command to become the Combat Capabilities Development Command, located at APG, Aberdeen Proving Grounds. They are tasked with not only finding but building the technologies to ensure future victories in our material development solutions, and really linking that technology development to that operational concept that I mentioned. That has been an incredibly seamless transition, and thanks in many ways to General Gus Perna. And we recently also received from AMC the Army's Medical Research Center, also we're located at Fort Detrick, and once again that has been a seamless transition in many ways thanks to General Perna and the great people at AMC. We have focused relationships with industry and academia, established the Army Applications Lab, which is located at a place called the Capital Factory in Austin, Texas, to provide a venue for entrepreneurs and innovators with novel solutions to discover how they can also support Army modernization efforts. We've also established the University Technology Development Division, the UTDD, which now serves as the primary link between Army Futures Command into the academic partnership efforts. In many ways, that's taking root in several key places right now at Vanderbilt University, with a partnership built between Vanderbilt and the 101st Airborne Division, Carnegie Mellon University, where the Army's Artificial Intelligence Task Force is located, of course, the University of Texas and Texas A&M, where we're beginning to work several key programs and establish those relationships. And of course, I would say at this point, the crown jewel in our effort is our cross-functional teams. And I know, as I said earlier, many of you took the opportunity to talk to the CFT leaders on Tuesday afternoon and evening during the session at Fort Myer. And I do believe that these cross-functional teams have been instrumental so far in meeting many of the milestones we set forth, and that's natural. The CFTs really preceded AFC and got their feet on the ground much quicker than AFC did. Those CFTs were designed specifically to meet the Army's modernization priorities, and those priorities, we believe, were based on the fundamentals of combat that, as we saw into the future, that were necessary to win wars using multi-domain operations concept and reestablish overmatch against near-peer adversaries. All this has been managed by the headquarters in Austin, which I would say sometimes faced the daunting task of both establishing itself as that blank canvas thing with no history, no SOPs, really no operating procedures, as well as providing oversight of that merger. And key to our success in that, and I will call it a success, is the fact that out of the people that I currently have in Austin, we have some tremendous soldiers and tremendous civilians that work hard, incredibly hard, each and every day to make sure that this enterprise is successful. And based upon the aggregation of all that, I fully intend to announce fully operational capable on 31 July. And I do believe that that's within a year, going from 12 people to fully operational capable is a incredible feat. And it is due to the hard work of those people, plus the help of a lot of the people I mentioned earlier from the Secretariat, the R staff, in particular the G3, the G8, and a lot of personal oversight, a lot of personal leadership by the Army senior leadership, and in many ways, help from Dr. Jette and the entire ASALT community. But this work would not have been possible without, as I started with, the support of Congress. So continued consistent on-time funding will be critical to our efforts going forward. And about this time of year, we always talk about continuing resolutions because they're always a topic in this town. So people ask, what is the impact of a CR? A CR will absolutely degrade our competitive advantage. It will delay the momentum that I believe we've established, and it will prohibit the start of 6 new procurement programs to include robotic combat systems, the multi-purpose equipment transport, and new navigation equipment to assure precision navigation and timing in a contested environment going forward. And of course, we've got people looking at the impacts of both short-term CRs and long-term CRs. I think General Ostrowski, I saw it in an article, most of you have probably read those articles. He had the numbers for you, so I'm not going to try to contradict him in terms of the impacts of a CR other than what I've just described. So in conclusion, it has been an incredibly exciting year, sometimes challenging, sometimes frustrating, but always exciting. And I tell people all the time that the ability to look into the future to make sure that our Army as part of the joint force is capable of not only winning, but more importantly, deterring future conflict, and that our future soldiers have the material, the doctrine, and the organizational structures they need to fight and win on a future battlefield makes my job the best job in the Army. So with that, thanks again to Dr. Jette, and thanks again to all of you for being here, and we very much look forward to taking your questions.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Okay, rules will be one question and one follow-up. Please wait for me to call on you. We're going to start off. Jen Judson, I saw your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Jen Judson with Defense News. There was a GAO report that came out yesterday that said that the AFC could improve a little bit in terms of working with small businesses. So I wanted to ask you both, what it is that you've been able to accomplish in the last year interfacing with small businesses, and what it is that you still need to improve upon to sort of get after what the GAO thinks is sufficient.
Yeah, I think this is either the third or maybe the fourth GAO report that's kind of been focused on this reorganization, and I read the drafts. I haven't read the final report yet, and I think the Army's comments back is we agree, and I've mentioned Army Applications Lab. I mean, Army Applications Lab is focused on non-traditional small business, and really the funny thing is, if I talk to the defense primes, they're convinced all we're working with is small business. And if I talk to small business, all they're convinced we're working with is the defense primes. But it's going to take a combination of both for us to accomplish our mission. In many ways, a combination of both working together. So I agree with the GAO report. Small businesses are key to our success. There's been a lot going on in the last, the GAO report, they finished, I think, their interviews and put it together a couple months ago. So we got a ways to go. I agree with them. I'm in the process right now of hiring a lead for my small business office to make sure we're focused on exactly what the GAO report suggests we do. So bottom line, Jen, I guess up short is we agree, and we're focused on making sure that we take advantage of the opportunities that small businesses offer, not just to work with small businesses, but to modernize and improve the Army.
And just to follow up on the Army Applications Lab, do you have any specific examples of some success stories? A year ago, I know that there was a briefing with David Zachari, who developed Sensei. I think I'm getting that right, hopefully. But are there any other things that you're noticing or that you see promise in specifically that could be incorporated into something?
Sensei is still moving along. At that time, it was an Air Force effort. We've kind of taken that effort on, trying to validate the technology. But working with David has led to an experiment that's going on at Fort Rucker either right now or very soon in terms of integration of virtual reality into pilot training, which the Air Force has begun, and we're kind of following their lead with the potential of significant cost savings in terms of aircraft maintenance, if no other reason, and possibly shortening the amount of time it takes to generate a rotary wing aircraft pilot, which would reduce the backlog. So there's just all kinds of added benefits. But it's a pilot right now. We'll see where that goes. AEL right now is either at Fort Hood or they were there yesterday working with soldiers on the ground up there to source problems, which is what AEL is really doing very well, I think, is sourcing problems from soldiers. So it's not me dreaming up the things we need to solve or the problems we're having. It's coming directly from the warfighter. And then they are currently in an effort to look at autonomous resupply for artillery. So that is ongoing with the Fire Center in terms of how do we automate the resupply of munitions for our artillery. And they have completed a trip overseas, and I'm going to say specifically where there was some specific recoding of some mission command systems, which significantly helped.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ashley working with James. I guess more of a top-level question. As you're moving out on these 6 priorities and all the technologies that are associated and with an eye towards major conflict with possibly Russia or China, what are you doing or any challenges you see not turning away on counterinsurgency operations and still keeping maybe some of these cheaper technologies around?
So and I'm sure this is true for all the services, the Army's first priority in terms of resources will always be to soldiers in contact. That's always been true. That will never change. And so we continue to focus on, in many ways, experimenting with new technologies in theater. So much of the network CFT work began with the first SFAB that went into Afghanistan in terms of comms equipment. And so it wasn't like we were experimenting with unproven. We never do that. But, proven technologies, proven equipment. And so in many ways, well, the SFAB was the first unit equipped with the basics of what we're working on in terms of the network. And then I would, so we're looking at next-gen squad weapon. That will probably go overseas first if we're still in contingency operations, which I'm guessing we probably will be. And so the focus, obviously, is in making sure that the soldiers in contact have exactly what they need when they need it, above all else. But I would just add that we've got to do both. And that's really what we're kind of focused on, not losing that focus, but we've got to begin to move to what comes next. And then from a MDO standpoint, it's not part of the concept of MDO, but there's a huge difference between a concept and a doctrine, and the Army fully acknowledges that we can't make the mistakes of the past, that what we've learned over the last 20 years has to be incorporated into the next version of doctrine that the Army publishes.
And you mentioned the network. Could you give us an update on where you stand? All these technologies are supposed to be able to interoperate. Has there been successes, challenges that you're facing right now as you move out on these?
There's always difficulties with interoperating with different systems, particularly because we have systems. So we have legacy systems because we just can't. It's not changing from your iPhone 8 to 10. We just can't swap them out. We've got to get them to all work together. Generally what we do is we look for backward compatibility in many of the approaches that we take, and that usually comes with an interface of some form. And then what we do is we're trying to migrate away from the older systems into the newer systems. We've, in fact, much to General Murray's point, a lot of the development of our concepts for the network as we're moving forward to go from a stationary network, which was really what the core foundation of WIN-T was about, to our current approach, is to the capabilities we developed and understood in the operational environment that was laid with the foundation of WIN-T and the connection using mix of terrestrial and satellite communications, different size pipes, different size server stacks at different locations so that we could manage our loss of connectivity and still retaining control over data, because these things are linked together when you really talk about the network. All of that was developed in much of what we experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now we've moved it over to being able to do all of that on the move, and that's where our focus has been at this point. Then to provide a tactical underlying layer so that we could improve the assured communications at the tactical level. And so we've moved to some new software-based radio systems, which also allowed us to put some new communications architectures in place that we're experimenting with right now. That looks like they're a really good fit, and we're moving forward with those. But it's not over yet.
And besides backward compatibility, which is absolutely critical, it's also compatibility, or the ability to connect with allies and partners as well. So, and that's very much why we've kind of taken an incremental approach to the network. Every 2 years, a cycle of improvements based upon developing technologies.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Pat Tucker, Defense One. Very good demonstration the other day at base. Really enjoyed that. Many of the modernization efforts, such as the unmanned ground vehicles and future vertical lift platforms, are going to utilize autonomy in some new way. So I wonder if you can just highlight some of the experimentation going forward that you feel is particularly important and critical, that demonstrates new approaches to either ground vehicle autonomy or aerial autonomy with drones. Which experiments going forward are the most important for you?
So, and I'll let Dr. Jette talk to the technical experimentation. We just actually had this conversation before we came over. So when most people, and you may not be, when most people talk about experimentation, they tend to focus on technical experimentation. I mean, can I actually control a vehicle autonomously? In my mind, that is critically important, but also critically important is what does this do to formations in terms of how formations operate differently? What does this do, the human-machine interface, the experimentation with that? What is the cognitive load that a soldier is capable of? Can he control 6 autonomous vehicles, 2 autonomous vehicles, 4 times, et cetera? And we just completed experimentation about a month or so ago at Yakima, which one of you went with me, and I won't mention which one because I'll get in trouble. No, it wasn't you. But so, and I watched the breach of a complex mine wire tank ditch obstacle. And for those of you that are not familiar with Army, so it's a simulated minefield, a couple hundred meters deep, triple stand wire, concertina wire, and fill in a tank ditch without a single soldier on any of the vehicles, to include the assault through the breach lane. And it was done poorly. If I was grading them, if I was an OC at one of our training centers grading them, they would have been doing it for the next 12 hours. But the fact that there was not a single soldier in any of the vehicles was pretty key. And I guess the most amazing thing to me about this entire experimentation, because it was an experiment, I got the kids off the vehicles and talked to them about how long it took them to figure out how to do this from a ridge line behind. It was like 2 hours, most of them said. And then I was absolutely amazed at that short of a period of time. And the fact of the matter is, because we did this in a rush, we just wired up Xbox controllers to enable them to do it. So they were actually working with, so we fit the machine to the human, as opposed to what we have done in the past of trying to bend the human to the machine, which I think is critical going forward in terms of experimentation and how we design systems. And at the same time, and you saw it the other day, the air-launched effects launched UAS from which is the foundational experimentation for our swarming technology from a Black Hawk helicopter going at about 100 knots. Which participated in that exercise as well. Plus, we did a chemical recon completely autonomously. And so we are in many ways, I think, dipping our toes into autonomy. And autonomy on the ground, especially cross-country, is going to be more difficult than driving down a highway or moving across an ocean or through the air. But I think we're beginning to dip our toes into the experimentation, not only from a technology standpoint, but I think as importantly, organizational structure and really how does that fundamentally change how we'll fight in the future.
So Russia right now is actually testing unmanned ground vehicles in theater in Syria. So is there an effort, or are you interested in testing some of these concepts in combat, as you just mentioned, that experimentation being really important? When do some of these concepts wind up on the actual battlefield to be tested?
I think, and Bruce, if you want to follow up, that's fine. I think, so there's got, and one thing I'm very focused on is I'm not going to force anything on a unit or soldiers that they don't want. And I think that, not that that's ever really happened in the past, but we tend to push stuff out in terms of experimentation that either doesn't fit the mission profile that they're after or really doesn't. And so specifically to the autonomous vehicles, I think when we start getting into well, there's a great example. So Brigadier General Scott Jackson, who's a good friend, commander of SFAB 1, saw a demonstration of what we're calling SMET, which is, it's basically it's a semi-autonomous supply vehicle. We've had some with soldiers, 101st and 10th Mountain, experimenting with them over the last couple months, is interested potentially taking that with them on their next mission. So I think it's going to have to be more of a pull than a push as we start to develop really knowledge across the Army of the things we're working on, and either an ONS comes in for it or a commander expresses a need for the capability, we'll be happy to provide it.
Yeah. So let me make the point. So I have a little experience with actually using robots in combat. Teleoperation of robots is kind of the baseline of current technology to include what you can see the Russians having done. That's sufficient for some operations, but it's not sufficient for where we want to go. So the insertion of artificial intelligence and reduction of manpower necessary to accomplish the mission tasks without having to have a soldier for essentially they're just not there's someplace else. We need to move farther forward on that. If there's, in our development of the experimentation plan, some of the robots are teleoperated, some of the robots have some artificial intelligence inserted. We'll advance that through the technical aspect of the experimentation plan. If one of them finds a operational value along the road that is of use to being deployed, the user, not the acquisition community, will present that and decide whether or not it's applicable to a current field use, and then we'll be able to push it into the field. But I would tell you, just for the sake of saying I put robots in the field, that's not what we're trying to do.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. John Harper with National Defense Magazine. General Murray, you mentioned that you're partnering with University of Texas and Texas A&M on some key programs. Can you give us some more details about what those programs entail?
Sure. So both University of Texas and Texas A&M, from a systems and a university standpoint, and in case of Texas A&M, from a state standpoint, have contributed some pretty significant money. So in the case of University of Texas, they are building us a robotics institute, converting an old building into a robotics lab at a fairly significant cost. And the problem I have given University of Texas, and on that same trip I mentioned before, I took one of the leading engineering professors from UT with me, was show me how to conduct to standard a breach of a complex obstacle without a single soldier within, a kilometer or two of the actual breach site. So that they will work with that focus in the robotics lab, and they're also working battery technologies. They have one of the leading, the gentleman that invented the lithium battery works at the University of Texas, so we're working battery and energy storage is probably a better way of describing that. Assured position navigation and timing is a focus area for them. And then at Texas A&M, focus them on hypersonics and directed energy research. And they will eventually, here in the coming years, build out a facility for us at what they call the Rellis campus, which is not on main campus. It's actually out with a lot of room to build a soldier development center to where we'll be able to marry up soldiers with engineering, probably graduate students with faculty, to go into some agile development capability in solving problems for soldiers.
This is the last question.
We got time, Pat. Unless Dr. Jette's got to go, we got time. I delayed him, so.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Wes Morgan with Politico. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you've mentioned efforts to support troops that are currently in the field, but what about, I know the Army is launching in the next couple of years these big division-level defender exercises overseas. I wonder if you could talk about, are there ways in which your command is planning on supporting that? I mean, especially from the multi-domain operations perspective.
Sure. So, experimentation in terms of the concept has been going on in Indo-PACOM for a few years, because we do have two experimental units, if you will, called multi-domain task forces, really formed around a fires brigade. One's currently been in existence for a year or so at Fort Lewis, or JBLM, sorry, and one we're in the process of standing up in Europe. So two fires units with significant capability other than fires, and so through Pacific Pathways, that concept and really the concept of multi-domain units, not necessarily just that unit, but how do you integrate and really utilize multi-domain capabilities inside of a unit formation, has been going on through Pacific Pathways. So those will be two key elements of the Defender series as it rotates back and forth between Indo-PACOM and EUCOM. And then the other key piece that General Cavoli at the U.S. Army Europe is focused on is really taking the concept of multi-domain operations and starting to experiment with it across all the formations that they have going on. There will be probably none of the things you saw yesterday as part of that experimentation, but it's really how you start modifying structures and organizations, and really I'll call it the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, procedures of how you fight based upon multi-domain capable formations.
If I could do a quick follow-up on that one, like up a level from that, as the services in DARPA more broadly experiment with multi-domain operations with things like the Assault Breaker 2 concept, how are you tied in with that, if at all?
So we're tied in we just executed our last in a series of multi-domain operations exercises, tabletop, if you will. I mean, it wasn't on the ground. It was out at Fort Leavenworth, to where we had the lead for the Air Force in terms of concept development as part of that experimentation. We had a 3-star Navy admiral that participated in that experimentation. So the other services, and we had the Marine Corps from Quantico, the 2-star from Quantico that would participate in the exercise as well. So in terms of the services, we're pretty well linked. There'll be a war game this fall hosted by the Joint Staff that will begin to explore this from a joint perspective. And then I'm getting significant interest from key allied partners, the Brits, the Australians, and others, in terms of which have always participated in the Joint Warfighter Assessment. They were at Yakima when I was out there, in terms of allied experimentation as well.
Travis Tritton, Bloomberg. I just wanted to be clear on the concrete steps that you're taking to address the GAO findings about there still being a lack of coordination when dealing with small businesses. You said that you are hiring a position, General?
Yes. Small business. Well, I'm standing up a small business office inside the headquarters, and there's a small business office inside the Pentagon, but I'm standing up my own small business office, small cell within the headquarters to make sure that we are at least knowledgeable, if not focusing on capitalizing everything small business can offer us.
And if I
I'll give you a quick, and we're working to try and make sure that we support from the small business office here in the Pentagon and the contracting methodologies that we use to assist AFC in continuing to develop small businesses. It's a critically important. A lot of innovation comes from small business. Just as a metric, the Army, there's a DoD objective, and I have the numbers, I think, but I don't want to give you the bad ones, so we can make sure you get exactly the right number. But there's a DoD goal. The Army goal is actually above the DoD goal, and we exceed the Army's goals and have for several years now. So we're very aggressively trying to pursue small business involvement in acquisition processes, and have even done a number of things to complement what General Murray is doing at AFC and give him access to all of that.
If I could just follow up quickly, can you talk at all about any upcoming opportunities for smaller companies, areas that you'll be looking at, certain capabilities?
So I think a lot of it will come out of these soldier source solutions that I kind of mentioned earlier that Army Applications Lab is working, and in particular this concept of autonomous resupply, I think, is an area that we can work with. And then it's in the preliminary stages right now. It's probably hasn't been announced, but we're looking at some point in the future hosting an event in Austin to try to establish some relationships between small business and defense primes, because the one thing I do worry about with small business is the ability to scale. And so there's lots of ways they can scale. One of the ways is working with a defense prime. And so, I mean, defense primes have relationships with small businesses, but maybe not the ones we're working with. And so how can we start to make some connections for these small businesses where they can produce the scale for us?
I know Tony sent some questions. He's back there, so.
I had one on Tony Capaccio with Bloomberg. I wanted to ask how you're going to be playing in future budget deliberations, specifically the CH-47 Block 2 truncation that the Army is trying to get through Congress this year. Every committee has kind of said so far that this is a future debate for FY21 and beyond. Will Futures Command be helping provide the intellectual backdrop or rationale for why that's a good decision?
Yes and yes. So it really depends, Tony, on which role I'm sitting in. So Dr. Jette and I think you're tracking, also chair the equipping peg, where that decision came from. So that was a near-term decision based upon the age of the fleet and where the Army thought they could accept from this. So that's all been pretty well explained. As we look at, because one of the key things that I've been tasked to do is, in the other role, is look into the future and examine the operational environment, what we think that will look like, what we think the tech trends of our near-peer adversaries, where they will be at that point in the future, and then kind of figure out what equipment we'll need. So as we look at that, that will absolutely inform future debates about CH-47, staying with what we got, CH-47 Block 2, if that decision's ever made, or do we move to a future heavy lift aircraft at some point in the future? But that's absolutely not been determined, but we'll help inform that.
Last question. Yes, sir.
Scott Massioni with Federal News Network. So you spent this last year setting up and getting things together. Now you're at full operational capability. What does that mean? What are we going to see change than what you've been doing in the past year, besides setup? You know, there's going to be new programs coming out faster, that kind of stuff.
No, I think you'll see from outside I mean, so you'll see hopefully I'll see a lot of difference inside the headquarters from outside the headquarters. I think you'll see pretty much the same focus that we've had for the last year. So I really based FOC on three things. One was the facilities. And so what's changed here most recently is Monday morning I moved up to the 19th floor of the building we're in, the University of Texas Systems building, which the key thing about the 19th floor is I have a SCIF and I've got ready access to classified networks, which will make a huge difference in what we're trying to do. So the facilities and the rest of the staff that's going to the 19th floor is in the process of moving up there as we speak. So the facilities, I'm very, very comfortable with where we are as of Monday morning. The people, the manning was a key thing that I was looking at in terms of metrics of judging FOC. The cross-functional teams, AI task force, are above 90% manned, so that they are good. The headquarters and, of course, Futures and Concept Center and Combat Development Center, or Combat Capability Development Center, are all right where they were, so their manning is fine. The headquarters itself, 100+% on military, and I'm starting to get the summer rotation going, so a lot of the temporary people are leaving and the permanent people are coming in, so I'm very comfortable with the military manning. Civilian manning, we're above 50% hired, and hiring is not an easy thing to do. And I'm very focused and have been very focused and have kept everybody very focused on hiring the right people as opposed to just hiring numbers. Key positions were 90+, I think, % manned, and so I'm very comfortable with where we are in the manning piece of it. And the last criteria was the ability to execute the missions that the Army had given Army Futures Command. And as most of you would suspect, the Army didn't give me a year off to kind of sort it out before they started asking things from me. So I think we have actually been executing the mission that we've been given for at least the last 6 to 8 months, if not longer. So that's why I'm very, very comfortable saying 31 July will be fully operational.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending today. If you have follow-ups, please come see me or some of I've got some of my staff here as well, and we'll work to get you any follow-ups that you may have. Thank you again for your time and being here this morning.
Thanks to all of you.